Okay, good afternoon to one and all. In our last class, we have covered the portion of interference of light. So there we have learned thin film interference, where the film was uniformly thick in one case, non-uniform thickness in the other case. That's what we call as Newton's rings. We have seen the consequences of various types of color formation in thin films, peacock feathers, soap bubbles, and even oil spillages on the wet roads. And we have tried to explain how we get beautiful colors, and also we have tried how to minimize the loss of light due to reflection in optical instruments, especially telescope or camera lens or whatever it may be. So if we apply non-reflective coatings on those lens systems, we can improve the transmission, and hence we can have better quality of image captured by the device. So with that, we have completed the interference part of wave optics. Now we are entering into the second one, which is diffraction of light. In this diffraction of light, we are going to deal with once again same light waves. There are two classes to be discussed in the diffraction of light. Before that, let me recap what is meant by diffraction of light. If you have studied your intermediate, there you might have learned the definition of diffraction. Probably somebody might be pronouncing it as diffraction, but I prefer diffraction only. So in this diffraction of light, the bending of light takes place whenever a light ray is propagating near obstacles. Whenever a light ray is propagating near obstacles, we see some kind of bending of light. The examples of real life are so many. If you look at any shadow casted by an object, let us say you are in front of a lamp, assume that you are sufficiently close to a wall, For example, there is a lamp here, and just I'm putting my hand here, and you suppose that the hand is very close to a wall on the back side, a wall or some kind of screen. This light is going to pass through this obstacle, and it is going to cast some shadow on the screen, right? So if you look at the shadow won't have sharp borders. What I mean is, you cannot expect the shadow uh, very sharp. That is, just after a specific geometrical line, everything is completely dark, and just before that, everything is bright. It is not possible. The shadow will always have diffused edges in most of the cases. The diffused light is only because of bending of light, that is diffraction, while passing near obstacles. Look at my hand. Assume that the light rays are propagating through the gaps between my fingers. Whenever they hit the screen, they are going to cast, normally if there is no diffraction, they are going to cast a sharp image of my hand. Exactly, sharp image. But unfortunately or fortunately, the image casted by this particular object on the screen due to a lamp won't be that sharp. The edges of these fingers casted on the screen are always diffused. So this is clearly indicating that light is not passing in a straight line. You know, in class 7, in 7th class, probably in your school, they might have taught you for the first time rectilinear propagation of light. Rectilinear propagation of light. That is, light ray travels in straight line, right? So in the case of this shadows casted, light is not really following the rule with 100% accuracy. Some violations are there. So whenever obstacle comes in the middle, it tries to bend a little over that obstacle and encroach into the geometric shadow. That's why the edges of the shadow are not very sharp, but some portion of the light will encroach over there, leading to a diffused edge rather than having a sharp edge. And that particular phenomena is what you call as diffraction of light, right? So I'll go to the definition first. And let me go to the definition. Yes, this is the definition of diffraction of light, Amma. So the bending of light rays, while passing near obstacles, you can call it as diffraction. This is the general phenomena definition in physics. There is something more to be discussed beyond this. That part I'll talk later. But as far as definition is concerned, you just take it as granted. The bending of light while passing near obstacles can be termed as diffraction. And there is a lot of confusion. What is diffraction and what is interference? If you go deeper into the subject, you may not be able to discriminate whether it is because of diffraction or because of interference. After all, the patterns that we see because of diffraction are also because of some kind of interference. So indiscriminately at the higher levels, people use diffraction as well as interference as synonyms. So you may not discriminate whether it is because of interference or diffraction. Both are basically superposition of waves. Okay, let me not confuse you in the beginning itself. Please try to understand the definition that bending of light rays while passing near the obstacles can be termed as diffraction. Now, let me come back to other ones. First of all, before you study this, you must know one thing. What is diffraction? What is a wave? Sorry. So in this picture, I hope some animation is playing now. I don't know whether it is happening or not. Maybe. Yes. I hope you can see now. This is something similar to the animation of a water drop. Water drop or some kind of fine object falling on a steady water tank. You take a bucket of water, keep it quiet, no disturbance, no vibration. Suddenly you drop a stone into that. Then you will get this kind of circular ripples, right? So these ripples are what we call as spherical waves. Spherical waves in 2 dimensions. Unfortunately, in 3 dimensions, I cannot show you. 2-dimensional waves can be understood, and from there, you try to imagine how the spherical wave in 3 dimensions will be. It is something like a sphere which is growing in size, concentric spheres. One after the other, they are growing in size and going outwards, right? So this kind of wave is what you call as spherical wave, right? So this spherical wave is because of a point source here at the center. You can see a dot amma. From there, the waves are emanating and they are progressing with time as well as space. So they are going outwards. Now, if you look at the same spherical wave by standing at a very larger distance, let us say near the edge of this figure, imagine that it is a very longer distance. Of course, on the screen, I cannot show very longer distance, but you imagine that this is a very long distance. So at that long distance, if the observer is receiving these ripples, how would they appear? Will they appear like a circle or will they appear like a plane? I'm expecting an answer from you. Yes, lines. Sahiti. Okay, thank you. So you're going to observe lines, and those lines are what you call as planes, right? So please try to understand there are only 2 types of waves, Amma. One, the waves coming from a point source observed at a finite distance from it. That is, if you stand very close to the object which is generating the light rays, the point source which is generating the light rays, if you stand very close to it, then the waves that you receive are called spherical waves. Spherical waves. Whereas if you are looking at an object which is placed at effectively infinity, that is from a larger distance, if you try to observe, the waves, the kind of waves that you receive are called plane waves. It means if we both, let us say you and me, point to point, if you are looking at each other, if we are at a finite distance, then the waves emanated by each of us is a spherical wave. So from each and every point, let's say from my nose, from my head, every point will act like a point source. As we are very close to each other, in that case, the waves received by you can be called as spherical waves. Imagine that you are standing at a, let's say some 100 feet distance away from me. Then the waves emanating from me will not be called as spherical waves. They will be something like a plane wave. Of course, I am not a point object. Please forgive me for this giving this bad example. If you can imagine myself as a point object, then the waves coming from me, if you are standing very near to me, are called spherical waves. And if the waves are received at a larger distance, you can call it as plane waves, right? Only 2 types of waves are there, Amma. One is plane wave, another one is spherical wave. Now, why I am telling all this? Because in order to study this diffraction, you should know about plane wave and spherical wave. We are going to study two different classes, Amma, which I'll show in the next slide. Probably you might have learned about light ray. Can somebody tell me what is a light ray? What is a light ray? Can somebody? Maybe somebody is typing, but I am unable to see. Path followed by light ray. Devika. Good. It is a hypothetical path because we cannot pinpointedly say, Amma, because it's not possible to say. I mean, it is happening. It may be happening, but it's not possible to say that the light is going in that way. It is an imaginary path followed by light ray, because we say light is a bundle of energy. We really don't know whether it is going in that particular line or not. But the simplest definition to this is light ray is the perpendicular drawn to a wavefront. Perpendicular drawn to the wavefront. Please pay attention here. I hope you can see some kind of circular arcs. Dots are drawn over here. Right. So on the left hand side, you have a point source. From a point, the light is emitting. And this particular light, of course, as it is a point source, it can be imagined as a sphere, a growing sphere in three-dimensional space, a growing sphere. So to that sphere, if you draw a radius vector, you draw any radius. So that radius will be these arrows, right? So these radius vectors will always be perpendicular to these curves. Please pay attention. So you take this curve, you take this specific point, the ray is nothing but the perpendicular drawn to this wavefront, because you know these dotted lines are called wavefronts. Wavefronts means the part of the wave that you are going to see when a wave hits you is what you call as wavefront, right? So this particular wavefront is what you experience, and a perpendicular drawn to this wavefront can be mathematically called as a light ray, right? Okay, I hope it is clear to you about the light ray. So in the case of spherical wavefronts, the light rays will be diverging or converging. From a point source, the light rays will be always diverging. And if the light rays are converging to this particular point, then you may call them as converging spherical waves, right? Generally, from point source, you will get always diverging spherical waves, but not converging. Just for clarity's sake, I'm giving you other definition also. So this is regarding the spherical waves and spherical wavefronts. Next slide. You can see here a lens I have shown, a biconvex lens, right? So this biconvex lens, probably in your earlier classes, you might have drawn light rays like this, marginal rays, the rays coming from the edge of the lens, as well as the paraxial rays, the rays which are very close to the pole of this lens, that is the central portion of the lens, right? You always draw three lines. One is coming from here, converging to this point. Another one is coming straight through the lens without any deviation. It joins to this point, and another light ray coming from this extreme joining here. And this point you call it as a focus. And the distance from the focus to the pole, the center of the lens, is what you call as focal length, right? Probably you might have studied about the ray diagrams. And this is another diagram in which I am showing you the wavefronts rather than showing the rays. Of course, these big yellow arrows are representing the rays, a bundle of rays, but these yellow lines are actually showing the wavefronts. So on the left hand side, you can see plane waves. It means from the left hand side at infinity, which I am unable to show in the picture, some source of light is there. So that light source was sending spherical waves. Beyond a certain distance, those spheres have turned into planes. So those planes I am showing here, and those planes are of course parallel rays, because if you draw any perpendicular to this particular blue line, all the perpendiculars will be parallel. Whereas if you look at the previous case, here if you draw these perpendiculars, these rays, please observe, here they are not parallel, right? So parallel rays will always come from infinity, whereas inclined rays, either they will be converging or diverging with respect to a specific point, right? They will focus to a particular point, or they will diverge away from that particular specific point in the case of spherical waves. I hope spherical and plane wave concept is clear to you. I'll move to the next slide. So here you can understand one thing. From the left hand side, parallel rays are being incidenting on the lens and they are converging to a specific point. So if the light rays are converging towards a specific point or going away from a specific point, you call them as spherical waves. You can see here, this is a spherical wave. You can see the spherical wave fronts. Whereas on the left hand side, you have plane waves. So basically, a biconvex lens is capable of converting, I repeat, a biconvex lens is capable of converting plane waves into spherical waves. Plane waves into spherical waves. Okay, right. I'll make a move to the next slide. I have a doubt somebody said. What is your doubt, Sai Kirtana? Spherical wavefront. SWF means spherical wavefront. In the previous picture, probably. In short, actually I have downloaded the picture from internet. SWF refers to spherical wavefront. Okay, right. So I'll make you move to the next slide. This definition I have already explained. Now I'm going to give you some clarity regarding interference and diffraction. Generally, interference, if you recollect whatever I have done so far in the previous classes, 4 classes, I always take 2 rays, ray 1 and ray 2. They are coherent sources, they are superposing with each other, and I always said they are going to cast a maxima or minima on the screen. In the whole discussion, I just took only 2 rays, only 2. In most of the cases, it is 2 only. So interference can be broadly classified in a layman terminology as 2 distinct point sources interfering with each other or superposing with each other. So if 2 distinct rays are superposing with each other, the resultant pattern can be called as interference. You can recall the Young's double slit experiment. In Young's double slit experiment also, you have got 2 distinct slits. 2 distinct slits. From there, the so-called primary waves are going to emanate and they are going to overlap with each other, leading to a bright and dark pattern on the screen. So if you have 2 distinct point sources which are superposing with each other, you call it as interference. Whereas in the case of diffraction, you're going to have infinitely many point sources, which is difficult to count. In most of the cases, it's infinity, right? So instead of having 2 point sources, 2 distinct point sources, if there are infinitely many sources overlapping at a specific point, you call that phenomena as diffraction, right? So in diffraction, usually the secondary waves will be superposing with each other, whereas in interference, the primary waves will be superposing with each other. You may have an immediate question. What is primary wave and what is secondary wave? So I'll make a move to the next one, which is Huygens wave theory. And from there, you can understand what is a primary wave and what is a secondary wave. Sorry. Huygens wave theory. I'll get back to the previous slide, Sama, don't worry. Hans Christian Huygens. He's a man from Netherlands. Now we are calling Holland as Netherlands. So he was from the so-called Dutch. In those days, it was Dutch. Now we are calling it as Holland. So he was a contemporary of Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, and this man, they were contemporaries, and they are having quite opposite views of light. Also, Newton said light is a particle, whereas this man, he said light is a wave. Light is not a particle. Ultimately, after the 20th century, people have declared that light is having both kind of natures. So both it is behaving like particle as well as wave. That part we will discuss in the quantum mechanics anyway. So in this discussion, we restrict ourselves to the wave nature of light, Okay, so in this wave nature of light, he proposed a simple principle called Huygens principle. So what he said is, when a light ray is propagating, definitely it is a wave. So the propagation of wave at future times, that is at time t equal to 0, light ray has started, and at time t equal to 1 second or 10 seconds, for example, where the light ray will be and how its shape will be, that can be decided on the basis of Huygens principle, which simply says that every point on the progressing wavefront. Progressing wavefront. Here, progressing wavefront means a wavefront which is moving towards a specific direction. From a point source, the light rays are emanating, right? Similarly, I am able to see, you are able to see my face, so the light rays are emitting from my face, right? So every light ray that is coming towards you from my face can be imagined as a wavefront, and on that particular wavefront, every infinitesimal point can be imagined as a secondary spherical wave. So the waves which are coming directly from my face are called primary waves, and on that particular wave, if you pick up any infinitesimal point, it will act as a secondary spherical wave. I repeat, every point on the wavefront which is emanated from my face is acting like a secondary spherical wave. So that's what Huygens said, and now I think you can understand what is a primary wave and what is secondary wave. So if you have two distinct points which are emitting the light rays, those light rays are called primary waves because they are directly emitted from the surface. And if you pick up a narrow wavefront which is a part of the primary wave, and pick up the points which emit secondary waves, those are called secondary spherical wavelets or Huygens wavelets, right? So this concept was first put forward by Hans Christian Huygens, and based on that, we are going to study the diffraction. Let me go back to the previous slide. So this is about Hans Christian Huygens. Before that, I have to introduce two famous persons in diffraction. Actually, in diffraction, we are going to have two classes. One is by Fresnel, Augustin Jean Fresnel, Fresnel's class. Another one is von Fraunhofer. Next one. So Fraunhofer's class and Fresnel's class. Out of the two, in our syllabus, we are going to study only the Fraunhofer's class, but not the Fresnel's class. Right? Okay. Let me explain what is Fresnel's class. Augustin Jean Fresnel, he was a French army engineer. He was a civil engineer. He was very fond of physics, especially optics. He wrote several articles on this optics. And this man, in his honor, we call a particular class of diffraction as Fresnel's class. Basically, it is going to deal with spherical or cylindrical waves. Anyway, in our class, we are not going to discuss about cylindrical waves. For our discussion, you imagine that Fresnel's class exclusively deals with spherical waves, right? So if you are having the object and image at finite distances from the diffraction causing object, please try to understand. You take my hand as an example. When you send light rays through this, it is causing the diffraction. It is forcing the light to bend, right? So this hand is going to be the diffraction causing object, right? So the diffraction pattern will be observed because of this, right? So in Fresnel's class, what happens is the source of light which is shining this particular object will be at finite distance. That is, these two are at very small distance, not at infinity. I repeat, the slit, we loosely call it a slit or aperture. The slit and the source of light, they are at finite distance, right? This is the Fresnel's class. Why? Because you want to have spherical waves, and you know spherical waves will be received by this particular object. Spherical waves will be received by this particular object only when the light source is at finite distance. Only the light source is at finite distance. So this gap between the source of light and my slit is always finite, right? Not only that, in order to see the pattern of diffraction due to this particular slit, you will be holding a slit here, right? Screen here, sorry. So you will be holding a screen here. So the pattern due to this will be casted on the screen. So the screen is also placed at finite distance because the screen has to receive spherical waves. Please remember, spherical wave means finite distance, plane wave means infinite distance, right? So in the case of Fresnel's class, you are only going to have spherical waves. That's why both source and screen, both source of light and the screen on which you are casting the pattern of diffraction are at finite distance with respect to the slit or the diffraction causing object, right? This is what you call as Fresnel's class. There is another class which is what you call as Fraunhofer's class. So in the Fraunhofer's class, what happens here is you are going to deal with plane waves. So if you are dealing with spherical waves, it is Fresnel. If you are dealing with plane waves, you are calling it as Fraunhofer. There is an unfortunate similarity between both these great physicists. They both died at 39 years age, and he was a lens manufacturer. Actually, he was from the today present days Germany. So he used to manufacture lenses. He was having a business there. Unfortunately, he died because of some unknown disease at the age of 39. He was also a great mathematician. And we are going to study the most of the diffraction patterns because of Fraunhofer class only. We are not going to study any Fresnel's class in our syllabus. The reason being, Fresnel's class is very difficult to handle. In the next slide, I am going to present the differences also. Fresnel's class involves solving of complicated mathematical integrals known as Fresnel integrals. And remember, it is not Fresnel, S is silent, it is Fresnel, S is silent, Amma. So in the Fresnel's class, mathematics is going to be extremely difficult. That's why they have not introduced that part in our syllabus. Whereas Fraunhofer's class, it's relatively easy to solve, right? So we are going to have the discrimination also. Please try to understand, Fresnel means spherical waves, Fraunhofer means plane waves. So here I have classified both of them. In Fresnel's class, left-hand side spherical wave summa, and Fraunhofer class you have plane waves. And similarly, no usage of converging lenses in Fresnel's class. As I mentioned, we are already having spherical wave summa. So if already spherical waves are there, there is no need of any further converging. So no need of any lenses in the case of Fresnel's class. Whereas in Fraunhofer's class, as I already mentioned, they are plane waves. And if you want to focus the plane waves, if you want to focus them onto a screen, then definitely you need a converging lens, something like a biconvex lens, right? So converging lenses are compulsory in the case of Fraunhofer class, whereas in Fresnel's class, no lenses are required. And coming to the other comparison, as I mentioned already, both image and object are at finite distances from the diffraction causing object, that is the slit or aperture. So with respect to the slit, both source as well as screen, they will be at finite measurable distance, but not at infinity, both of them, right? Whereas here in the Fraunhofer case, both the source as well as screen, they are at effectively infinity. Please try to understand here, I should not use the word infinity directly, it is effectively infinity amount. In physics, if you are using a converging lens or use any convex lens, if you keep some object at its focus, the image will be formed at infinity. Infinity really doesn't mean any infinity in mathematics. So a distance beyond a certain value can be treated as infinity in physics, right? So you are going to keep both the object and the screen in Fraunhofer class effectively at infinity. I use the word effectively. So physically it is not really infinity, but it is a finite larger distance, right? So you call it as infinite distance. And coming to the last one, which in students' point of view, the mathematics are really difficult in the case of Fresnel's class, whereas in Fraunhofer class, the mathematics is relatively simpler, right? So this is the classification, and I have already posted these presentations as well as the notes in the group, in the WhatsApp group. You can follow it, and I'll make a move to the next slide. Already we have seen this. I'm going to explain a little bit of Huygens wave theory. See, all these Huygens wave theory are not a part of this course. I don't have to discuss all these things, but in order to proceed further, you need to have a strong foundation. Without knowing this Huygens principle, you cannot derive anything in the diffraction part. That's why I'm just recapitulating these things. Probably in intermediate, you might have studied what is a spherical wave and what is a plane wave. We are actually recapitulating the same things in order to have a better understanding of diffraction. Okay, so here please pay attention. We are having the same principle. Every point on the progressing wavefront will act as a source of secondary spherical wave. In the lower picture, please observe here I have red lines. These red lines are parallel lines. They are actually representing the wavefronts, plane wavefronts. As I mentioned in Fraunhofer's class, we are going to deal only with plane waves, right? So these plane waves are coming from infinity, and what Huygens said is every point on this wavefront, you can take A dash as an example of one wavefront. Imagine that God has given you the ability to freeze the light. Imagine. Then you will be able to see this particular AB wavefront at a particular point. It's frozen. Then you try to pick up at least 4 points. As an example, I'm taking 4. It's not really 4. It can be infinity. So I'm just picking up 4 different points, Amma. So these 4 points will act like a secondary spherical wave, spherical sources. Means from each and every point, you are going to get a spherical wave in the forwarding direction. In the forwarding direction. As the wave is propagating towards the right, so I try to draw circles with some radius. With what radius I should draw? Well, you know that the speed of the light is c. Speed of the light is c, speed. And if you want to locate this particular wavefront A at later time t, please try to understand, you have frozen the time and you are just holding the wavefront A dash, and you want to know where it will be. Of course, it will be at B, but where it will be, if you want to guess, you must wait for a time of t seconds. I mean, t duration. Light is very fast, 3 lakh kilometer per second. So I'm just freezing the time. Please try to understand. So at this point shown below A, I have to draw a circle in the forward direction with CT radius. CT radius. What is C? C is the speed of light and T is the time interval to travel from here to there. So with the CT radius, you know, distance equal to velocity into time. I hope you remember the kinematics formula, right? So CT distance, as it is a spherical wave, it is going to travel a CT distance. So that is the circular arc shown over here. Not just this point, Amma, even this point also will travel in the forwarding direction. So I should draw another semicircle like this with respect to this point. And coming to the third point, another semicircle. And coming to the fourth point, I should draw another semicircle, right? Okay. So the locus or the overlap of all these wavefronts is going to decide the future of this A dash. That is, at time t equal to 0, it is A dash. At time t equal to t, the new wavefront, this BB dash, is going to be inscribed by these overlaps, right? You may get a wrong impression that it is not a perfectly straight line. It is having curves. Please remember, I have taken only 4 points, only 4. But on a straight line, there are infinitely many points. On a straight line, there are infinitely many points. So instead of drawing 1 point here, if I draw so many neighbors here at every point, you can understand that these arcs are going to be pretty small arcs. And when the gap between 2 points tends to 0, then it will become a straight line. Please try to understand. When you increase the number of points here, these arcs will overlap and ultimately form a plane here, a line, right? So Huygens theory is successful in predicting the future of the light ray, how the light ray will move, how the wavefront will progress in time. That is clearly explained by the Huygens theory. And on the right hand side, I have another thing, Amma. I have shown a point source, a spherical source. From there, a spherical wave is being emanated. So this spherical wave is actually progressing in time, and I want to locate once again where it will be at later times. So at A dash, we have an arc. I hope you can see A dash is there. Just a minute. I hope you can see A dash. This is the arc, Amma. So this A dash is having some point sources. Some points I have marked here, and assume that you have frozen the time at that particular instant. Now, if you release the time, the wave is going to progress in time. How it will go? Well, Huygens said at every point you try to draw a circle, a semicircle with radius c into t. So this is CT, this is another CT, this is another CT. Like that, you have drawn so many arcs. Now try to understand, if each and every point on this A dash is emitting a circle, then once again their locus, their overlap will be another bigger circle, BB dash, right? So Huygens theory was successful in predicting the future of whether it is a plane wave or a spherical wave. It is able to predict the future properly, right? See, you don't have to study this part for examination. Just I am recapitulating the things because I'll be using them for the next derivation. So I'll just move to the next slide. If you have any questions, you can ask. Okay, meanwhile, you type. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer. I'll move to the next slide, Amma. See, the diffraction chapter starts with the Fraunhofer single slit. Our syllabus starts from here. So Fraunhofer diffraction due to single slit, double slit, and N slits. We are going to discuss three different Amma, due to single slit, due to double slit, and due to N slits. N slit is called diffraction grating. So these three we are going to derive one after the other. And remember a word of caution. Please try to understand the single slit. Whatever procedure that I follow in the single slit, repeated procedure I am going to apply for double slit as well as for N slit. It is going to be the same. Apart from the limits of integration, all the three will be identical. So please follow this method carefully. Okay. So here in Fraunhofer diffraction, what we have here is a single slit Amma. Left hand side, I hope you can see here. Left hand side we have a slit. You can see an open portion. This upper one as well as the lower one, they are opaque. They are non-transmitting portions. They are covered with some paint or something. Imagine that this is the narrow gap. And I also suppose that it is rectangular slit. Rectangular slit means only this portion is allowed. Nowhere in the upward or downward direction light is allowed. And here you can see left hand side arrows are coming. These arrows are the rays of light. In this case I took green. It can be anything, but usually it is monochromatic. Only single wavelength is used here, not multiple wavelengths. So assume that the single wavelength is some lambda. So a lambda monochromatic source is emitting light rays which are going to hit the rectangular single slit in this vertical plane, right? So after they pass through, they are going to convert into spherical waves. Why? Because every point on the wavefront will act like a secondary spherical wave. So these secondary spherical waves are going to overlap, and those overlap that particular overlap causes maximas and minimas on the screen, right? I'm already revealing you what is happening, what is going to happen on the screen, but actually we have to derive this particular part. Before deriving itself, I'm just explaining you that you are going to get this kind of pattern, right? Okay, so I'll make a move to the next slide where I'll start the derivation. Whatever I have shown in the previous slide, please try to understand here. Here I have shown this as opaque, so this is the blocking portion of the slit. The lower portion is also opaque. This is the blocking portion of the slit, and in between this you have some open portion. It is purely exaggerated view. The size of the slit is usually of the order of a few microns. Please remember, it's of the order of few microns. And let me reveal you one more thing. If you want to see the diffraction effects, the overlapping of waves, the slit, I repeat, if you want to see the diffraction effects, the slit width must be comparable with the incident wavelength. I repeat, the slit width must be comparable with the incident wavelength. That is, lambda must be comparable to the size of the slit. Of course, in this case, the width of the slit I am taking as small d. I hope you can see. If you can imagine this point as origin, horizontal axis is x-axis, along vertical y-axis direction, I have the slit. Along y direction, the slit is open, right? So you can see the y coordinate is plus d by 2 here, and this is minus d by 2. So from minus d by 2 to plus d by 2, the slit is extending, and hence the width of the slit is small d. I hope you understand this. So the small d is actually of the order of lambda, means the wavelength and d, they are comparable. Don't think that the slit is 10 centimeter or 20 centimeter long. It is of the order of few microns. Then only you can see the diffraction effect very clearly. You can see the fringe patterns due to diffraction also. Those are pronounced only when the slit size d is comparable with the incident wavelength lambda. I am just recapitulating one thing, If you recall the thin film interference in the previous class, there the film is said to be thin. There the film is said to be thin when lambda is comparable to the thickness of the film. So if the thickness of the film is comparable with lambda, you call it as thin film interference. And similarly here, for diffraction case, the lambda must be comparable with the d. The slit width and lambda must be comparable. Then only you can see the diffraction pattern. Similarly with thin film also, if the film thickness is too large, you cannot see the interference effects, right? So for interference as well as diffraction, the required condition is the thickness in interference must be comparable to lambda. The slit size in diffraction must be comparable to the same lambda. Okay, right. Now let me give you the description of the slit. So you have a slit extending along y direction, the open portion extending along y direction from minus d by 2 to plus d by 2 with a whole width of d, and plane waves are coming from left hand side from infinity. They are coming from left hand side and their wavelength is lambda. They are plane parallel beam because I am discussing the Fraunhofer diffraction, so I only involve with plane waves. So these plane waves are actually hitting this normally open portion. I mean, this gap is open, so this portion is simply hitting it. Then on a distant screen, I hope you can see on the right hand side you have a point PMR, right? So this point P is the observation point. You can see there is a screen also, and the middle triangle is only for calculation's sake. There is no obstacle here. Just I have shown this triangle as a zoom view of this triangle ODS, right? This portion I have highlighted here. Actually, it is not a part of any obstruction. Fine. So on the distant screen, usually this distance is infinity. I mean, the screen is not very close to this O. Please observe, O and the screen are far apart from each other. So on a distant screen, you are going to observe what is happening. So I have considered an arbitrary point P that makes an angle theta with respect to the horizontal. So I am interested in understanding what is happening at P, right? So now recall the Huygens principle. According to Huygens, if some person, I mean some wavelet or wavefront, if some wavefront comes and hits a particular position, there it will try to emanate spherical waves. Once again, you imagine that the time is frozen. You are sending light rays from left hand side, and just after reaching the slit, every point has started behaving like a spherical point source amount. So to understand this, actually I should draw so many point sources, but I have not drawn to avoid confusion. I will show the other diagram also in the next slide. So I have taken only two spherical sources. Please observe these rings. They are not really rings. They are actually point sources, spherical point sources which I have intentionally drawn. One situated at origin, and don't think that they are already sitting over there. Actually a wavefront came and hit from the left hand side. So that wavefront, it's having so many points, out of which I have taken only 2 points. O is 1 point and S is another point from where the two spherical waves are originating. And those spherical waves will travel towards the screen. I am interested in only 2 rays where they meet at point P. And don't misunderstand that OP and SP are not inclined rays as the diagram depicts. So the diagram may be confusing you, but in any textbook you will find this diagram only. Actually, there is a lens in the middle, there is a convex lens in the middle which I have not drawn to avoid confusion, right? Actually, this SP and OP are parallel rays. I repeat, SP and OP are parallel rays. They are not converging rays. Unless you use a lens here, they won't come to point P here, right? So that part is different. Anyway, so from S, I am getting a spherical wave. From O also I am getting a spherical wave, and these two waves are causing some disturbance at point P. Please recall the principle of superposition. I gave a simple example, a crude example in the beginning class, that what is principle of superposition. Assume that I am the subject, I am point P. Two of the girls from the class, assume that this is a offline class. I just called 2 girls and asked each one of the girl to come and give me a slap. First girl came, gave me some slap. I have started crying with some intensity. After some time, second girl also was called and ordered to give the slap. Second girl also slapped me. So I have cried with intensity I2. First one I1, second one I2. And if both of them attack me together with 2 tight slaps, definitely my intensity will be different, right? With this crude example, I am trying to explain at P. So if you can imagine the point P as a light receiving point, then both the wave coming from O and the wave coming from S are going to hit the point P. They are going to cause some resultant superposition or resultant disturbance. So what I have to do is I have to count how many points are there between minus d by 2 to plus d by 2. Each and every point, as Huygens said, each and every point in this blockade, in this open portion will emit a spherical wave, and those spherical waves will be overlapping at a point P. Don't misunderstand me. Will they overlap only at point P? The answer is no. They are going to overlap everywhere on the screen. But my interest is what happens at this particular point, which makes an angle theta. Just by changing the theta, I can just vary a mark. I can just I can just see somebody is asking for video. It's not possible to upload that many videos. I'll post it in the YouTube. After the session, you please go through that. Okay. So, sorry, forgot. So this point P is receiving so many disturbances which are coming from so many point sources, and at every point you are going to have disturbance. What I have done is I have generalized the case. So at theta angle, what is the disturbance at P? If I change the value of theta, I can span the entire screen, right? So I can get the information of each and every point on the screen just by varying the theta. Okay. I hope the description is clear to you, and I'll make a move to the next slide. Of course, there also you will have this diagram, right? Let me move to the next slide. See here, I have cropped the image. I haven't shown everything. I have just concentrated only on O and S. Remaining portion of the video, the picture was cut off. I am interested in writing the wave coming from point S. Generally, in intermediate, you might have studied, any wave can be represented as y equal to a sine theta, y equal to a cos theta or b cos theta, etc. Right? So in general, instead of theta, we use phi. You can see in the picture, we have a phi, and you may have some confusion. Suddenly, how come this e power I phi came? You know, Euler number, e power I theta. In complex numbers, intermediate first year, mathematics you might have studied. E power I theta cos theta plus I sine theta. Right? So here, instead of writing sine theta and cos theta, I am intentionally taking this e power I theta. There is a reason for doing like this, because while doing the integration, instead of using sine and cos, e power I theta simplifies my life. That's why I'm choosing this particular part. So general waveform can be expressed as a sine omega, or I mean a sine theta or b cos theta, some amplitude a into sine theta or cos theta, right? You will never see tan theta because tan is a discontinuous function. Both sine and cos are equally applicable because they are sinusoidal waves. Light is also sinusoidal wave, right? So I am trying to imagine the wave coming from S as some amplitude into some sine theta or cos theta. As I already said, instead of writing sine theta or cos theta, I'll be writing just e power I theta or e power I phi. I'm not using theta, I'm using phi. So here you can see e power I phi is representing the waving part. You take the wave example, sine theta, cos theta. I mean, y equal to a sine theta, y equal to b cos theta. What is that sine theta, cos theta representing? Is it not the waving or oscillating part of the wave? After all, a and b are constants, na? A is amplitude, b is amplitude. So some constant term multiplied by an oscillatory term, that is what you call as a wave mathematically, right? So here I am assuming that e power I phi is the oscillating part and a dy is the amplitude. You may have a sudden confusion. How come this a dy came? Please pay attention here. I have actually divided the entire slit into small pieces. Earlier I said S is the point. Now I am calling S as a small dy. As you know, it is extending along y direction. So I have divided the slit entirely. I have sliced the slit entirely into small pieces, each of width dy. So dy, like that. There are infinitely many dy's between plus d by 2 to minus d by 2, right? So one such dy, I have exaggerated. The blue color shaded portion you can see, it is representing one small slice of dy, right? So within the dy, your point S is residing. So this dy is going to contribute something. So it is the point source. First, you should know what is the amplitude coming from this point. First, you should know what is the amplitude coming from this point, and then you can multiply by this e for I phi to get the wave generated from this S. Imagine that these are sinusoidal waves, Amma. So these sinusoidal waves I must express mathematically using some expression. I have written this as a dy e power I5. You may ask how come this a dy came. Remember, the full slit from minus d by 2 to plus d by 2, let us say it is receiving an amplitude of some small a. Small a. I have mentioned here, please see, small a is the amplitude of light received at the width per unit width. So if you can imagine minus d by 2 to plus d by 2 as 1 unit, let us say 1 centimeter for example, then within 1 centimeter gap, if a units of amplitude is received, then that is what you call a small a. I repeat, a is the amplitude per unit width of the slit, right? So within this entire gap, you are getting a. Then what is the share of a small dy? If the unit price is, let us say 10 rupees, if I purchase 5 units, what is the cost? Is it not 5 into 10? Just like that. As the unit price of intensity is, unit price of amplitude is A, and I am purchasing dy number of units because dy is the width amount. That's why A dy is going to give me the amplitude of the spherical wave emanating from this particular point. Are you able to follow? Is there anybody? Is everybody sleeping? Are you with me? Okay, somebody is responding. Fine. So this point S is going to have some amplitude which is given by A dy, and it is going to have some oscillatory part which is e power I5. Fine. Now my problem has further reduced to solving of this phi. What is this phi? How to calculate this? That part I'll do in the next slide. I have tried to cover so many things, but it's already 3:50. So I'll try to cover this portion and try to get some expression, and then I'll stop. I'll do the rest of the derivation in the next class. Okay. Fine. See this. So I have written d psi p. D psi p, a complicated thing. See, the p is actually intended for representing the disturbance caused at PMR. Please imagine the situation with a common example. Let us suppose that between plus d by 2 to minus d by 2, the whole class of CSE and IT are standing. Let us say each and every point is representing one girl. So the girls are standing from first roll number to last roll number, combining CSE and IT. So each and every girl can be imagined as a point source, right? So this is the screen and this is the point of observation P. Let us say a person is standing at P and each and every girl is asked to give him a slap, right? So everybody is going to hit the point P with different intensities. So how I am dealing this problem is I am choosing an arbitrary girl, some rth girl, kth girl, some number, because your roll number may run from 1 to 150, let us say. So between this 1 to 150, I am choosing an arbitrary X girl or rth girl. So that particular girl in this case is S. So this S is going to cause some disturbance at point P. So how much is the contribution from this particular girl? If I can calculate at P, I can simply integrate from minus d by 2 to plus d by 2. That is from roll number 1 to roll number 150. If I simply integrate, that is going to give me what is the resultant disturbance caused at P. Right? So for that reason, I am interested in a specific point. So this S point, the minuscule point, is going to cause a disturbance at P. That is what I am calling as d psi P. Psi is some Greek letter. If you dislike, you may call some Z also. As I have already used Y for Y direction, that's why I am not using XY. I am using psi only for that reason. It is some function. If you dislike, you may use F, DFP. Why I am using DF? Because it's infinitesimal. Ultimately, if you integrate over the entire numbers, it is going to give you the F or it is going to give you the psi, right? So this d psi p is the infinitesimal disturbance caused by a spherical wavelet coming from point S, right? So that disturbance I have written as A dy e power I5. Now reason phi phase is connected to path delta through the relation phi equal to 2 pi by lambda into delta. 2 pi by lambda into delta. It means if a wave travels for a distance of delta, then the phase phi of the wave will be 2 pi by lambda into the path traveled or the distance traveled, right? Please keep this in memory, it is useful. Now, my interest is to calculate this delta through this phi, because phi is already known. I want to have some expression in terms of path. For that reason, I have used this triangle. Please pay attention to this triangle. It is a zoom view of OD and SMA, ODS triangle. As I already mentioned, of course, I have given you a warning here. The rays SP and OP are parallel rays. I'm making it clear, though the picture depicts them as inclined rays, they are not actually, they are parallel rays, right? So from point S to point P, from point D to point P, they are parallel rays, right? And remember, also draw a perpendicular, this SD. This SD is nothing but a perpendicular drawn to these parallel rays, right? So after D up to P, after S up to P, the distances are the same. As I said, SP and DP are parallel rays, and of course SD is a perpendicular drawn to these parallel rays. So the distances SP and DP are same. So the only difference created between S and O, I mean the rays coming from S and the rays coming from O, they differ in path by only OD. You may immediately ask, why are you considering O? Because I said an arbitrary girl, an arbitrary point. So I must have some reference now. I am choosing the central portion of the slit as my reference. If you dislike, you can take the edge of the slit also as reference. But the mathematics will be somewhat difficult compared to this. That's why I chose the central portion of the slit as my origin for mathematical simplicity. So what am I doing here is, I am just taking a ray, a spherical wave ray, coming from O, meeting at point P. This is a reference ray, right? With respect to this reference ray, what is the arbitrary ray coming from S? I want to explain. Assume that this OP is the ideal ray. Ideal. See, if you want to compare a person, you always choose an ideal person, and with respect to that ideal person, you say this fellow is cunning fellow, or a crooked-minded, or a good person. All these things are with respect to some reference, na? That's why I am taking this OP as my reference ray, and with respect to this OP ray, I am going to calculate what is going to be the SP ray, right? So for that reason, I am trying to calculate the path difference created between the two rays, as phase phi of this S ray will be decided by the path difference delta. So the path difference is nothing but, just by looking at the picture, you can understand, SP equal to DP. So only difference is OD, So the second ray, I mean the S ray is differing in path from the O ray by OD distance, right? So this OD from the picture, I have actually zoomed this SOD triangle. In this SOD triangle, you can see, as I have mentioned, this as angle theta. Please observe, this is theta. So the angle SO horizontal line is 90 degrees. You can see SO is a perpendicular, it's a y-axis, and O horizontal axis is this. So X and Y axis, they are separated by an angle of 90 degrees. So definitely if this angle is theta, and the balance angle here, please pay attention. The balance angle here at D, I mean not at D, it's actually SOD, SOD. Angle SOD will be 90 minus theta, 90 minus theta. As D is a perpendicular, so this angle, that is OSD is going to be theta. Why? Because this is 90 minus theta, this is 90. Obviously, the other angle should be theta, right? That's what I have shown in this picture, So angle OSD is theta, and also we know that the S, I mean the differential element dy. Let us suppose that this dy is situated at a distance of y units from the origin. That is OS I am taking as y, because it's along y direction. Somebody is saying thank you. You want to quit or what? I'll leave. Just please wait few minutes so that I can complete this picture. Right, this right angle triangle I have taken, and from this right angle triangle, I want to calculate OD. Just you take OD, it is a sin theta equal to opposite OD by y, or in other words, OD equal to y sin theta. OD equal to y sin theta. So this is the path difference created, and this path difference I am going to substitute, and I'll continue that in the next class. Just I'll show you the expression. So this phi is actually replaced, you can see here e power I phi. I have replaced the phi with path difference 2 pi by lambda into sin theta. So it became e power iqy, right? So this expression I will continue in the next class. And if you have any questions, you can ask. Sai Kirtana, if you are having any difficulty in attending the class, just quit the class, Amma. It's 3:53, few minutes only. If you have any questions, you can ask. I hope that everybody is comfortably sleeping there. Nobody is responding. No questions. What is Q? That part I'll explain. Q is nothing but just 2 pi by lambda sine theta. I will explain this next in the next class, just to avoid carrying this big expression. Instead of calling this entire term 2 pi by lambda sine theta, for mathematical simplicity, I am calling it as Q. It has no physical significance. It is nothing. Just instead of carrying a big parameter, I am putting it as a smaller parameter. That's all. There is no physical significance. For the path difference, why are we taking only OD? Amma, I already mentioned, if you look at the previous slide, I said these two light rays are parallel rays. From S to P, it's a line, straight line. From O to P, it's another line. Actually, they are parallel rays. I want to compare an arbitrary ray coming from S with respect to the origin. Assume that origin ray is the ideal ray. With respect to this ideal ray, how much path difference is happening to S, right? So if I can write this as S can be generalized, now S can be pulled downwards, S can be pulled upwards. So from anywhere minus d by 2 to plus d by 2, S can be anywhere, right? I'm taking a general point. So this general point is differing in path by O by how much distance? That's what I was trying to calculate. So that's why I took it. And I already warned you that this SP and OP are not parallel rays. I mean, they are not inclined rays. They are actually parallel rays. The diagram depicts something. Actually, I should draw some convex lens, but that will create some more confusion in you. That's why I intentionally omitted that convex lens here. Actually, these are parallel rays. So if you take two parallel rays and if you drop a perpendicular in between, can't you calculate the difference of distance between the two? After S to P, after D to P, the distance is same. So the only difference comes from the OD. That extra path I am trying to calculate. Is that okay? Are biconvex lenses present in the picture? If present, why they are not shown? Only to avoid confusion, if I just draw a convex lens, you may ask, the light rays are bending this way now. So I cannot say theta is constant. Actually, theta is constant, Amma. Theta is not varying for a given ray. But if I draw a lens, you may think that as the light rays are bending and reaching the P, how can I say this as theta? That's why, to avoid that confusion, I have intentionally omitted that lens. If you want, you can have that lens. You can draw just a big convex lens. What is wrong? You can draw it. As I have drawn this triangle in the lower portion, that may overlap with that. That's all. SP and DP are the parallel lines. Then how can we get an angle? Amma, which angle are you talking? SP and DP are parallel lines. Then how can we get an angle? Which angle? See, please don't get confused. SP is making an angle theta with respect to horizontal, not with respect to OP. I repeat, SP is also making an angle theta with respect to horizontal. So if you draw a line at S parallel to this x-axis, that angle will also be theta. Amruta, they are not intersecting, just shown. Of course, at P they are not going to intersect. Then you may ask, they are going parallel, how can they overlap? See, in order to see the overlapping, if D is physical, Devika something, if D is PHY is equal to, okay, D phi, okay, D phi is equal to Y. D phi, where is D phi, Amma? I have not used any D phi. Oh, he's the SMS language. Okay, is the phi equal to Y? No, phi cannot be equal to Y. Phi is angle, Amma. Phi is phase difference, some phase difference. Generally, you study kx, k equal to 2 pi by lambda, propagation vector, intermediate 2 pi by lambda. Do you recapitulate it? Kx. Sin kx plus or minus omega t, sin kx. They use kx. That k is this 2 pi by lambda. In place of x, I was calling delta. SP and OP are parallel. Of course, SP and OP are parallel, perfectly parallel. But in the picture, they are shown intentionally to overlap. Not here, sir. Amma, Devika, I am unable to follow you. You wrote something in the first equation. Which equation? You want to unmute? You want to speak something?
Sir,
Yes.
ask to raise her hand, sir. Those who want to ask any doubts, raise your hand. Sir will unmute you.
Sir, ఇక్కడ ఏం చేయాలి సార్?
సార్ మీరు సెలెక్ట్ చేసుకుని మీరు అన్మ్యూట్ చేయొచ్చు సార్. ఆ క్యాండిడేట్ రైట్ క్లిక్ కదా, యూ కెన్ అన్మ్యూట్ దెమ్.
సార్ ఇది ఓకే సార్.
మోర్ అని వస్తుంది కదా సార్. ఆస్క్ టు అన్మ్యూట్ అంటే వాళ్ళు అన్మ్యూట్ చేయగలరు సార్ మీరు.
ఎస్ సార్. ఓకే సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. మా కెన్ యూ స్పీక్ నౌ? హలో దేవిక. హలో మా, ఆర్ యు దేర్?
మా దేవిక, ఎస్
సార్.
చెప్పమ్మా.
అక్కడ ఫస్ట్ ఫ్రాన్హాఫర్ డైఫ్రాక్షన్ కిందన d5 = a into dy ఉంది కదా సార్.
ఎస్.
అక్కడ 5 అంటే ఈ ఈక్వేషన్ నార్మల్ గా మీరు వేవ్ ని రిప్రజెంట్ చేయని చెప్పారు కదా సార్.
ఎస్.
అంటే a dy is the total amplitude అని.
Yes.
And d5 is the wave representation.
Oscillation, oscillatory path. Yes.
Yeah sir. ఈ d5 అన్నది ఎట్లా వచ్చింది సార్? అంటే
నేను d5 ఎక్కడ యూజ్ చేయలేదే. d5 ఎక్కడ ఉంది?
ఇది సింబల్ అర్థం కాలేదు సార్. అంటే d5
ఎక్కడ?
ఇదే సార్, ఈక్వల్స్ టు a dy = e. ఇది ఏంటి సార్?
ఇప్పుడు నేను ప్రెజెంట్ ప్లే చేస్తున్న స్లైడ్ లోనమ్మా.
అవును సార్.
దీంట్లో ఇక్కడ d5p, ఐ మీన్ d psi p = a dy e power i5.
psi p సార్, సారీ.
అదే కదా 5 నేను ఎక్కడ రాయలేదని. d psi p is the infinitesimal disturbance. అంటే ఇప్పుడు ఇందాక చెప్పిన దాంట్లోనే సపోజ్ ఒక మనిషిని నిలబెట్టి ఒక్కొక్కరిని కొట్టమన్నారు. క్లాస్ లో మొత్తం 60 మంది ఉంటే 60 మందిని పిలిచి ఒకటి తర్వాత వెళ్ళి అన్ని కొట్టంటారు అన్నారు అనుకోండి. ఇందులో ఏదో ఒక పర్టికులర్ నెంబర్, ఒక ర్యాండమ్ నెంబర్, సపోజ్ ఏదో 47 అని ఒక నెంబర్ తీసుకున్నాను యాజ్ ఎన్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్. ఆ 47 అనేవాడు వెళ్ళి కొట్టినప్పుడు వాడి దగ్గర డిస్టర్బెన్స్ క్రియేట్ అవుతుందా లేదా?
అవుతుంది సార్.
దాన్ని నేను డీసైపీ అంటున్నాను. ఆ ఒక పర్టికులర్ ర్యాండమ్ ఆబ్జెక్ట్ వల్ల వచ్చిన కంట్రిబ్యూషన్ డీసైపీ అని అంటున్నాను నేను. ఈ డీసైపీ అనేది ఏంటంటే దీన్ని ఇంటిగ్రేట్ చేయాలి. అంటే ఇప్పుడు రోల్ నెంబర్ 1 వాటి డీసైపీ అంత, రోల్ నెంబర్ 2 వాటి డీసైపీ అంత, రోల్ నెంబర్ 3, రోల్ నెంబర్ 4, అలాగా మొత్తం మీ స్లిట్ లో ఉన్న రోల్ నెంబర్స్ అంటే -d/2 నుంచి +d/2 దాకా ఉన్న ప్రతి డీసైపీని పట్టుకొచ్చి ఇంటిగ్రేట్ చేస్తే అక్కడ p వాల్యూ వస్తుంది మీకు.
ఓకే సార్. డిస్టర్బెన్స్ ఎట్ p సార్.
yes, the disturbance cause, అందుకే మనం సబ్స్క్రిప్ట్ p వాడుతున్నాం కదా. the disturbance cause, ఇప్పుడు ఈ వేవ్స్ అన్ని కూడా వెళ్ళి అల్టిమేట్ గా p దగ్గర జరుగుతాయి కదా, p దగ్గర ఓవర్లాప్ అవుతాయి కదా. నేను అందుకే ఆ పాయింట్ p దగ్గర వీటి కంట్రిబ్యూషన్ ఏంటి అని అడుగుతున్నాను. నేను ఆ పాయింట్ p దగ్గర కంట్రిబ్యూషన్ నేను dψp అన్నాను. the disturbance caused at p due to an infinitesimal element dy. is that clear?
Okay sir. Yes sir. Thank you sir.
Okay, fine. Anybody else? Anybody else? Shall we quit the class now? Okay. Thank you all.